This is Colin again, and I'm going to be talking to you about governance thinking and best practices. I think this is a really important point for a number of reasons. I certainly don't think there's a shared agreement anywhere of what data governance is and how it should be practiced. We certainly created our products both on premises and in the cloud with a particular philosophy in mind, and that does seem to have been quite successful. But I need to make sure that you're aligned with that thinking and that you understand it. So if there's anything in this session that seems unusual to you or you disagree with, please make use of the Q&A panel, and I will make sure that I leave time to discuss those. But what we're going to do just now is just clarify what CDGC is ready for now and what it's going to be ready for very soon. And then we're going to talk, probably the bulk of the session is about the governance thinking, because once that's established, so many of the best practices kind of fall out of that. It's more a statement of common sense. I would remind you, of course, that when we were talking earlier, we talked about the flexibility of the cloud platform, and that there are still many different products that speak to many different personas and give them functions and features. This is just another graphic that kind of says very similar things, that when a customer is engaging with you, whether they're re-engaging with you because you've worked with them before, they're engaging with you for the first time, they have a particular set of needs at that point in time. And it could be any one of these. And that, when you come to look at the Informatica product stack, CDGC was specifically designed to launch with these capabilities. Obviously, being able to catalog, be able to have a comprehensive set of definitions and policies which can be applied to the catalog assets, to be able to link in data quality, and of course to do things at scale through discovery of both the assets and enrichment and lineage. We also put something into CDGC which I think you could have done in Axon, but it didn't seem to resonate with customers. There was a way of doing this, so we specifically put in something about governed AI models. I think arguably you could have done that with Axon data sets if you were familiar with that, but it's there explicitly because there was a perceived gap in the market. Now, the one thing that's missing from this is what I was talking about, which fueled both the creation of both Axon and Calibra, which was regulatory governance. For the time being, we focused on getting an effective catalogue and enrichment capabilities, and the governance assets that are there do help you do a number of things, but arguably right now they might be a little bit light to be able to do everything that a customer might need for regulatory governance. So we're anticipating that might be something that existing customers are more interested in from next year. And what that, in order to be able to deliver that, it's likely that you're going to see additional features that allow customers to express the uniqueness of the way that they see things in their organization. So that's going to mean changes to configuration. Some of the stuff in CDGC right now is fairly fixed. We've still got a whole roadmap of connectors that we still need to develop, and on the governance side, particularly if you're familiar with the facets in Axon, there are about 25 different facets. We don't have anything like that in CDGC, nor are we going to. We've no aspirations to replicate all those business contextual facets, but we do need more before we're going to be able to handle regulatory governance to our satisfaction, and therefore to customer satisfaction. But regardless of all of those things, we still need to have a conversation about what governance is, because I've seen changes in governance, and I've arguably been involved in governance for about 10 years, maybe 12 years now. Formerly in analytics, I used to run commercial analytics departments in an airline. I had many analysts that worked with me. Some of them were doing a data scientist role. Some of them were doing a regular reporting role. We always had challenges with the data. And having a joined up view where you know who to go and speak to, and being able to self-serve as much as possible saves a huge amount of time. But one of the things we need to talk about is what governance is. And even before we get to that, I want to pose the question of whether governance has changed in the cloud. Because obviously, we're making great guns about the technology that we're using. We haven't just replicated old technology in the cloud. We've refreshed some of it, hopefully to facilitate more seamless integration, primarily the extensibility argument. And sure, the technology has changed. I think the core things that people need to do with the data haven't. And therefore being able to enrich your catalogue and to promote a subset of that view to describe it in a more business-friendly way, I think those use cases remain. I think one of the things that I'm quite keen on is I see a difference between data governance, which I see as a kind of oversight and planning activity, versus data management, the day-to-day just management of data. Every new day brings, more data from the previous day, if it's nothing more than that. But those overnight ETL transactions still need to happen in a reliable, predictable, auditable way that doesn't change the data. So the one thing is, I think on premise, we used to have Axon as that oversight tool in a separate box to EDC. Clearly, we do not have that in the cloud, and I do think that that's something we need to be careful about, because the one thing that I observed when I joined Informatica through the acquisition of Axon was that customers see, the Informatica logo, the Phoenix, in the top left-hand corner. They're so used to Informatica providing tools to the more technical members of an organization, that some of them made the mistake of thinking that Axon was just another technical tool, and they were wrong about that. So again, we've very much got all those personas that I talked about before, and fair warning, I'm going to use that slide again. But all those different personas have very different viewpoints and expectations, and we need to make sure that they're all managed. And I think that's potentially a challenge in moving to CDGC. But apart from that, if you've read the EDC Business Adoption Guide, which some of my colleagues produced, if you've read the Axon DG Playbook, which I produced, a lot of the content, a lot of the principles in there have not changed one iota. Obviously, both those documents talk about how to apply those principles to different products, but the principles are still very important. If you've been on the on-premises course before, you will recognize this slide. I put it up just in case this is the first time that you've come to a partner course with Informatica. What data governance is open to debate. And certainly, if you have been in the data game for many, many years, you might recognize that earlier data governance initiatives leaned more towards the left-hand side of this. It was very much a technical activity undertaken by the technical community for the reference of and for the benefit of that same technical community. It was all based on making sure that we adhered to some pre-described plan, and there were punishments if you failed to comply with those. Obviously, they were only interested in the physical data that they created and curated. And one of the things that even in the last few years has become very clear is quite a lot of that's changed. It needs to be a much more open conversation, because just naturally through the way in which technology has changed, more members of the business community have become part of the data conversation, and we need to welcome that. We need to embrace it. So when we are talking to the business community, I've already said that they won't necessarily understand the technical way of thinking, but also they don't care. They don't produce the data. They just need to use it, and they've obviously got their own priorities and pressures to make sure that they're using accurate data. And that's where the key interchange point between the people that create and consume data comes. They want to trust the people that create the data. and obviously using many of our tools to do that. But it's very much, governance is a much more open thing. It's about how data is actually being used, not how it's supposed to be used, because the reality is almost always different to the plan. And that can be very simply because a regulator, for example, just changed the rules and we're having to do some kind of temporary solution whilst IT busy themselves creating a project and delivering against those new requirements. Quite often, some of those temporary solutions become permanent because they work quite well, and there's new things come along, and we decide to spend the IT budget on those. So having an understanding of non-physical world is just as important as understanding the physical world. Obviously, because of data proliferation, I think the balance of physical data versus human transformed data is probably shifting, but it's still an important thing. But certainly for the business people, context is just as important as data. So, for data scientists, for people that are shopping for data, a lot of the context that we show in Data Marketplace is about showing maybe other processes that consume data, and inviting the community to talk about the data and how it's worked for them. And these are different ideas that can help users decide if they've searched for something and they've found a candidate, it can help them decide whether it's useful to them. So giving context, and instead of just some very bland schematic or entity relationship diagram, is a way of engaging less technical people. At the beginning of last decade, this was approximately the model that people were looking for. There's some kind of command and control, some kind of oversight that seeks to bring in some of the inputs from all this more day-to-day activity that's happening, on the coalface, trying to make sure that data retains its recency, its accuracy, etc. And of course, you probably recognise that some of these activities were supported by specific Informatica products. As we move to the cloud, this has changed. Sorry, I put Data Marketplace as blue because it emerged towards the end of the decade. But as we move into IDMC, this is more the model. Now, I don't think we're completely comfortable saying that EDC and Axon have just been replicated in CDGC. It's true to a point, and if it helps customers understand the kind of things that can go into it, great. I think we would see the combination of the activities that that CDGC supports as being a bit more than just a simple combination. Now, why is that? Well, of course, we talked earlier about these personas up at the top and making sure that they can get what they need from the Intelligent Data Management Cloud. But if we think purely about governance for a second, what we need to do is think about what that means. Governance needs to unite communities. I've always said for years that the new trainee who makes you the coffee in the morning might need to have a conversation with the chief executive, and they just imagine the different experiences there, the knowledge, the different viewpoints. It's pretty extreme, but if they have a conversation about data, they're coming from very different places. On a more realistic point of view, data scientists might want to talk to developers and engineers on a regular basis. Now, whilst these people are very technical and the data scientist might be able to understand them most of the time, if the business user who's asking the data scientist for details is part of that conversation, are they going to understand these people? Chances are they won't. So the platform has to make sure that it delivers the right data, but more importantly, it's got to be the right data for the right people, because different people have that different levels of technical understanding. They've also got to be sure that the data is fit for a specific purpose. And again, more technical people can refer to technical literature, and the business users might not be able to do that. They need some of that more business-friendly context that's going to help them. So just recognize that different personas need different things because of whatever it is that makes their job in the organization special. One of the ways in which you do that is a shared enterprise glossary. Now, this was true in on-premises products. It's just as important in the cloud. What we are not trying to do is propagate siloed glossaries. We talked in the previous session about the dangers of a siloed mentality. We need an enterprise glossary. So this was a challenge in the on-premises world. It's one of the most important facets. Sorry, facet is a misleading word. It's one of the most important elements of a governance program that we have one glossary, and I'll be talking a lot more about that later. What the Cloud Data Governance and Catalog product does is it allows you to create a comprehensive technical catalog and link it to a business view. Now, just in case you've heard this one before, I used to hear this all the time, and I heard it earlier this year, and I haven't heard it for years, and I didn't agree with it. Cataloging alone is governance. I don't know if any of you have ever heard that. People think that if you can scan all your physical assets into one repository, do a bit of scanning, bit of enrichment, you can tick off data governance. I don't think it's been remotely true for years, if it was ever true at all. So one of the challenges with a catalog is represented by this table on the left. So we have a table, so it's got some resource name. Here's the table name, which doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. And we've got what I'm sure we can all recognize as typical naming constructs for physical assets. So we've got something called cust, ref, ID, and I think pretty much anybody could guess that that is some kind of customer identifier. So that's okay. Account code, well, that's maybe open to a bit of interpretation. Is account code the same as customer account number? Well, we don't know. And the problem is that some of this data might actually be presented to business users in some kind of business-friendly report screen. So although we know, the technical community know it's this table and this data, you don't necessarily have the link to how it's presented to customers. So getting this knowledge that means this, that means this, is actually really important for helping communities understand data, and especially when that same data, so these are the same two views I showed below, but what happens if the same physical data is delivered to different communities using different names, which can still happen because quite often the naming constructs in departments follow the norms for an industry. They're not necessarily always consistent within a company. So how do I get to know that this thing called cust ID is the same as customer number, is the same as cust ref ID? Well, that's part of the glossary story. We can add titles and links within the catalog to show that this is just an example of this, and we can do the same if we're representing these as governance assets and talking about where they come from and their story through the technical sphere, and also if we're presenting them as governance assets, we're inviting the business community to say, well, we know that these are tables that you value, so perhaps you're going to document the processes that consume data from them by creating assets in the process facet and linking to them. And that builds up a network of shared understanding that is highly beneficial. So again, the takeout from this is many personas will get value from that more technical view of the data, but generally when they can understand that technical view, there's a lot of information that they want to know. Profiling, technical lineage, transformation logic, etc., and the catalog will serve those needs. Just don't assume that the business community or anyone who is less data literate will enjoy that same experience. They just want the data to do their job, so let them do that. If you force people who don't understand technical content to look at the catalog, they will disengage. And one of the most important things about a governance program is getting hearts and minds involved, and just as importantly, keeping them involved. So anything Anything that's done to make that more difficult is what we call a barrier to engagement. Barriers to engagement kill governance programs. So again, governance doesn't need every piece of data about data. It doesn't need every piece of data about the business context. It just needs enough to join the dots at a high level. Governance is a much higher level activity. Obviously, it sets out principles and they will be followed when maintaining the data, but getting that oversight is a much higher level activity. And it should be written in a language that avoids jargon as much as possible. And when I say jargon, I mean we don't let the more technical people talk about entity relationship diagrams, third form normalization, and lots of more modern concepts. But at the same time, we also don't let the lawyers and the accountants and the finance people run away with their equally impenetrable set of terms that they use every day. You know, there has to be a bit of meeting of minds on both sides. It's the same, and this is just an example of process. So I know from speaking with many of our customers that they document key activities, whether it's account opening, risk management, liquidity assessment, etc. They document the processes, and they typically use maybe Microsoft Visio, or they use ARIS, process modeling tool. Now, that process modeling tool is just like a catalog. It's a highly specialized tool, which can be used to great detail by subject matter experts, process modeling experts. So they're still going to get value from whatever process modeling tool that they use. And it might just be a source that we want to take some of the information and put it into CDGC so we can make that link between business activity and data and get that understanding. It doesn't mean that we have to copy and paste all the information from a process modeling tool or a Visio diagram or whatever tool the customer is using into CDGC. All we need are the high-level metadata interchange points, because then we can create relationships between the process or the policy and the data set or the system, whatever it is. That is enough to get a high-level understanding of how things are, how and why data is created and what's done with it. That's enough. And keeping that summarized view actually makes the job of governance easier, because a good governance program is a lazy governance program. You do the absolute minimum you have, and you don't do lots and lots of activity in the hope that it will be valuable later. You validate that it will have use before you do it. So in summary, you've got to think a little bit differently about governance. Context and business understanding doesn't come from drowning in detail. That's something a customer said to me a few months ago. So it just echoes some of the messages that I've just given you. The rest of the slide reinforces what I've just said. The content that you put into the governance assets is often a summarized view of external content, which is managed externally and will continue to be managed externally. One of the ideas that we've used for many years to try and explain the blind copy and paste is summarize for your grandparents. Now, this is becoming a bit more of a difficult image, because I don't know about you, but many of your grandparents probably have worked in the IT industry. But when we started using this, I think that was less established, and maybe your grandmother or your grandfather didn't really know what a computer was and didn't really trust them. But imagine trying to explain to that kind of grandparent how data flows around a bank for a risk report, or how you create a set of data for data scientists who are trying to mine a customer database for new insights into a customer. If you can break that down into something that a grandparent could understand, it's a little bit extreme, but it's quite a good way to think about the separation of the detail versus the governance representation. One of the things, and I do apologize that the slides kind of labor this one, don't be tempted to see the business view as something you worry about later. We have seen some of our early CDGC customers say, we just want to catalog quite a lot first and we'll worry about governance later. We don't think that's a healthy way to do things. I think the move to the cloud is a really good opportunity to try and get them to think about some kind of workflow where every time you're scanning an asset, the earlier you scan an asset, the chances are it's more important to the needs of the business. So let's scan it, do a little bit of enrichment, and then actually promote some of it to governance and find out why the business found it, think it's so important, because then we're getting that end-to-end workflow where we're doing the technical scanning and we're actually deriving business value from it by understanding and explaining why it's important. Trying to separate what stays in the catalogue and what's promoted into the business view. There's no easy answer for that. But the simplest way to start explaining that is that when information comes into the organization, it goes through numerous processes to classify it, enrich it. It maybe moves through different life cycle phases before we're confident and we publish it. Now, I would say that most of that stays within the catalogue, and only almost like the endpoint, where it's consumption ready, is the right kind of thing to promote to the governance assets, so that you can put policies and describe maybe legal entities, business areas, things like that you'll be familiar with from the on-premise products which are coming to the cloud. It's these kind of things that give the context and the understanding that this is this is the process that creates that management report for the UK. This is the one that gets used in marketing in France and Germany. Those kind of views are built up on the governance side because they're not relevant to the technical, but you can still use policy and glossary within the physical resource, but within the physical sphere. A lot of the contextual stuff will only happen on the governance side. So some of that thinking has brought us to a place where we have developed some content. The stuff that I'm about to show you is with the marketing people, and you might see a different version of this coming out soon. But to explain to you today, we came up with the idea of a route map for success using CDGC. So what we've got here, two simple boxes. On the left-hand side, things you should do. On the right-hand side, things you should avoid. And then I'm going to go into a slightly more detailed view of how you might achieve that. First of all, and this has been the same for the on-premise recommendations, start small. Get this new workflow going. Don't just let people go catalog crazy, or don't let them go process and policy crazy. Get a balance. We need to match whichever side you start on. We need an equilibrium. We need to be able to balance it off and make sure that we're getting that end-to-end workflow. So make sure that you have a limited scope, limited time project that doesn't try to do too much. You've got a representative group of people, using those personas that I've shown before, and just get them working together to start the conversation, maybe work out some of the bugs so that you can expand and expose the thinking to a wider community. So what that means is, when you go to the catalogue, just initially, we only want to maybe look at 2 or 3 catalogue sources and choose ones that are supported out of the box that have business relevance. Once you've scanned them, start doing some enrichment. Again, we don't want to go crazy with the enrichment. We just want to start showing the promise and the potential value. Because once you've done that, because we've chosen assets that are easy to scan but also have business relevance, we can start creating that business view of them without too much fuss. And what that's going to allow us to do is, I say, we've got the technical view and we started the enrichment, but we've also started talking to the business and saying, we know these assets are important to you. Start giving us the context of why they're important to you, because that's going to help people later. So obviously, the flip side of that for many things is just the opposite. But don't start big to impress. it's really difficult. If you've given yourself too many objectives, you're going to fail on some because you're going to run out of time. The meaning of it all is going to get lost. Again, don't get lost in the details. So even when you're working on these limited use cases, try and stick fairly high level. Don't try and do every piece of analysis. Perfect being the enemy of good. That's just the flip side. I think I've already mentioned that one. Don't get lost in the business exercise of over documentation. We do want to represent at a high level the aspects of business context that are important, but again, a good governance program is a lazy governance program. So if you do a little and it's not working, then it makes sense to do more. If you do a huge amount and everybody just stares at you and go, what do you do that for? Well, you feel daft because you just wasted time. But more importantly, the organization didn't get any value from it. And again, there's just don't focus on one aspect. So I told you I was going to labor that one. So I'm going to jump past that and use this slide. Again, I said that the biggest danger that we've seen initially is people going, I want to do a lot of cataloging right now. Now, obviously, the kind of customers that you and I deal with on a regular basis have got a very big data landscape, and inevitably the cataloging exercise is going to go on for a long time. That is simply no excuse for trying to explore that workflow and getting an equilibrium between the technical view and the business view. Because if you focus on the technical view, you'll just keep holding the business off. And for months and months, you just say, yep, next month, and they will completely disengage and they won't be that interested. The bigger problem being that when you actually try to engage with them, you've either got such a volume of things that they think it's impossible to join in with this journey, or some of the little things that could have helped them engage were just not prioritized, and there's nothing for them to hook into. So again, as I said earlier, if you've got nothing to offer people, you won't be able to engage them. So try and make sure that you've got that. And the best way to do that is a collaborative approach. There you go. Because as I said, if you just spend a lot of time in a catalogue, you've got a well-described catalogue and very little else. The problem with this slow approach is some customers will think you're moving too slowly. I just need to go on and get this done. It's a false economy to agree to that. What we need to be able to do is make sure that we are building a program that serves the needs of the business and it doesn't serve the needs of one particular part of the community. Okay, I can see some questions coming in, so I'm just going to stop there for a second and see what we've got. So question number one is how and at what stage of a governance initiative are we in a position to provide a view on ROI to the stakeholders? It's an excellent question. It's also incredibly hard to answer. But again, one of the things following on from the section that I've just done is if you have a nice contained POC, you can agree some guidelines for that. It's very, very difficult to quantify the benefit of a governance program. Certainly, I talked about the regulatory aspect of the on-premise products, and obviously the big thing for the last few years was avoiding those GDPR fines. How can you measure the fine that you didn't get? You can't, but what you can do is you can, certainly with the on-premise products, they already have a rich set of use stats. You can set up searches that measure engagement, and those same features will come into CDGC in good time. You can look at the number of assets that are being properly stewarded, but also you can just sort of, there are subjective things like, is the community more connected? Do we have a sense that problems are being resolved quicker? Now, some of that is very difficult and to write down and quantify. I used to run a marketing analytics department. There's a classic joke that the marketing director tells you that half their marketing budget is wasted, but he doesn't know which half. And I think that is quite true. Maybe I'm just jaded from my time in marketing, but I think that's true. But there are objective criteria that you can set out. David has asked, can this CDGC roadmap be used also for on-prem? I'm asking because of licensing costs. Well, I haven't really given you a roadmap. Other colleagues will give you a roadmap today. I'm just giving you an idea of where the products are going. I think what we're doing in the cloud is quite different because there isn't really a licensing burden. Within Axon, you would likely edit licenses and non-edit licenses. You don't have that in CDGC. You've got consumption-based pricing. Yep. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, David. I'm just trying to see, can the CDC roadmap be used for on-prem? I think they're in very different places. I mean, the on-prem is very mature and cloud is a lot less mature. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Is it possible to see slide 24 again? It will be very possible to read it after the presentation because we will provide it to you. Or critical prerequisite. What are critical prerequisites, technical and business, for data catalog? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question, so maybe you need to elaborate on that. So, as I said, the principles that I've just gone through were how to approach a pilot with a customer who's using CDGC for the first time. Now, when you get a hold of these slides, what you'll see is that this slide is showing us a high-level view of 4 waves. So each of these is a wave of activity that basically does a little bit to help understand either the catalog side or the business side. So obviously, any governance program, a glossary is critical. So the first thing you do in any governance program is look for a glossary. At the same time, you might start with one of those simple resources and maybe start, if you can, to start documenting some key business processes in the governance facet. Now, at that point, we're just creating things and not connecting them. But in the next wave, once we've done that, we can start to expand the glossary. We might choose a more complicated scan, and we will start that process of enriching the catalogue and maybe starting to talk about that contextual business view, where we maybe promote some of the data assets and put some relationships in to policy and process, etc. And it goes on like that. And the whole thing is, we're not trying to do too much. We're just trying to try simple things, show the promise, show the potential, and generate questions about what we can do to improve it. Again, we're not doing too much because we try not to assume that we know what the customers need in this paradigm. We're trying to learn what that is. But every wave finishes with some iteration. So I'm not going to go through these in any detail because I've got a few messages that I want to close with. But this is basically an expanded view of what wave 1 might look like. And it's got business elements and it's got technical elements, which is why it's important that we have a cross-section of the governance community involved. And it's just trying to show how different elements can happen, and then start that process of connection and building up that complex web of understanding. But every wave finishes with reflection and a confirmation that the plans for the next wave are commensurate with that. And again, we're just building up, we're doing a little more scanning, we're doing a little more business enrichment. Then at some point, and you might need to go through this cycle of waves a couple of times with different communities to get the education and get the buy-in and get that engagement and adoption. But again, at some point, people are going to go, right, I get it. We've worked out how this is going to work. And then all of a sudden, there will be a need to do a lot of scanning, but it can be done in the understanding of how it's going to be used. And then maybe a section of the community can at that point pair off and concentrate on that scanning because we know what we're going to do with it, and different communities can start leveraging that. So that's the rough idea of the roadmap to success. I just want to close with a couple of quick thoughts on the key elements of these governance programs. First of all, I've already talked about the glossary. I hope you agree with me that no governance program can function without an effective set of definitions. That's really key. What we do need to be clear about is that definitions are just, they are incorporeal. They don't have any form. We are not talking about data. We are talking about what a thing is, and if it ever appears as a piece of data, we're defining that expectation. It's really important that people understand the glossary does not describe consumable data. It describes concepts that you might find later defined as data points. I've already talked about the need for a single glossary. So let's go into that with these two builds. So again, I've already talked on the left-hand side about the idea that the glossary is conceptual definitions. We've noticed on premises that customers are really comfortable with the idea that any technical assets from EDC that are onboarded into Axon will naturally fall into the system dataset attribute construct. What we've also noticed is that some customers have this idea that if they've got some kind of report or dashboard, for some reason that I've never been able to understand, they think it's a good idea to document them in the glossary because they don't look the same as the physical data. In governance, one of the simplifications that we do is we don't really care what the data looks like. All we want to know is what does the data hold and what's its value. So we really do strip data down to one representation. And in CDGC, it is still going to be system dataset, data element, they're called in CDGC, not attribute as in Axon. But we do not put anything other than definitions in the glossary. And I'm sure that you guys can accept that, but I promise you, you're going to run into customers that don't. So be ready for that one when it comes across. This idea of a single glossary for the whole enterprise. I know that many systems have their own set of definitions built in, and increasingly we're seeing people trying to create data domains, and there's one that they create multiple data domains in the glossary. I don't agree with that. A data domain is an implementation. It is a set of tables that have been designed to serve a particular use case, whether it's it's orders or customers or whatever. But the one thing is, they are going to use many definitions that are common to other data domains, and that's why I don't want to see multiple independent data domains that reuse the same ideas from other data domains. It's not helpful for many reasons, and one of the worst things it does is it defeats the catalog's ability to enrich the physical world. There is only one name for a thing, and if SAP and Oracle call customer ID a different thing, we just agree what our view of that concept is, but we know that when we see this concept enabled in Oracle, it's going to look a little bit different than it did to SAP. It's just like that example of the technical view versus the business view I showed you earlier. So that's really important. This one, again, we're starting to see customers trying to do this, but it's a single enterprise glossary. We only define a concept once in the glossary, and that means that the form that the glossary takes is going to be unique. It's not going to conform to any one data domain or one system, because it just can't. That doesn't serve the enterprise. I talked about this earlier. The idea of the AI model asset within CDGC was basically trying to deal with a perception that customers had that Axon couldn't handle that kind of information. I personally think it could, because you could have an Axon data set of type AI model in the same way that you can have one of reference table or table, etc. But it's just reminding you that customers have got lots of different ways in which they hold data, and for governance, when we're trying to describe the reality of how data gets used in the organization, might need to think flexibly about what the data set holds. One of my biggest concerns on-premise and in CDGC is the amount of customization that is used. There is one Axon customer, who has added 100 custom fields to one facet. That is disastrous. I just cannot begin to describe how bad an idea that is. With Customization in CDGC. Obviously, you can add custom attributes to the catalog, and as far as I'm concerned, I don't necessarily see any great changes to the way in which that was done in EDC. In the governance side, there are fewer out-of-the-box fields for the governance assets in CDGC, and therefore I think it's maybe more natural that customers might need to add in a couple, especially if later on, next year we'll be providing capabilities to migrate Axon content to CDGC, and they might say, well, actually, I've got used to this field in Axon, I want to keep it in CDGC, so they'll need to create a custom field before they can bring it in. That's fine, but my advice is, don't add custom fields in the governance side for specific use cases. We use relationships for that. We should only use custom attributes to describe what the object is. Use relationships to describe its viewpoints to different communities. And crucially, whilst I used to say if you're adding more than 3 or 4 custom fields to Axon, you're probably doing something wrong. That number is going to have to increase in CDGC. So maybe if you're adding more than 7 or 8 custom attributes in CDGC, I might start to think that you're doing something a bit off-piste, because you might need to add a few more to handle the simpler set of fields that we provide out the box. But always, if you're going to go for customization, it's not the first thing you do. Always try and establish that it's really needed rather than assuming it's needed and putting it in. Work out what you can do before you work out what you can't do. Okay, I'm out of time. You will see that there are 2 more slides here. One saying that we cannot promote content between different instances. I think Keshav might have already spoken to you about that, so I'll let you read this slide in your good time. And my final one is just to say that governance is a collaborative activity. So quite a lot of the challenges in running the governance program have nothing to do with the products. It's all about maintaining engagement and adoption through content that is meaningful to different communities. And there are many human factors that you're going to have to work out with each new client. Good luck.